Ordinary people behaved in various ways during the Holocaust. Their motives ranged from pressures to conform and obey authorities to opportunism and greed and even hatred. In many places, the persecution of Jews occurred within a context of centuries of anti-Semitism. In Germany, many individuals who were not fervent Nazis participated, to varying degrees, in the persecution and murder of Jews and other victims. After the German occupation, countless people in other countries also collaborated in the persecution of Jews. Everywhere, there were bystanders who encouraged those actively participating in persecution and violence. Most, however, remained silent. Get ready, because today we're going to see how ordinary citizens became murderers back then. Throughout the 1930s, many Germans helped the Nazi regime's efforts to remove Jews from Germany's political, social, economic, and cultural life. Nazi activists, local Nazi leaders, and members of Nazi paramilitary organizations, the SA and SS, and the Hitler Youth, used intimidation against Jews and non-Jews to enforce Nazi social and cultural norms. For example, they harassed Germans who entered Jewish-owned shops or who showed friendship toward Jews. But even Germans who did not share the extreme Nazi belief that the Jews were a source of racial pollution participated, to varying degrees, in the persecution of Jews. For instance, members of sports clubs, reading groups, and other voluntary associations expelled Jews. Teenagers in schools and universities took advantage of their new freedom to harass Jewish classmates, or even adults. Many ordinary Germans became involved when they acquired Jewish businesses, houses, or belongings sold at bargain prices, or when they benefited from the reduction of commercial competition as Jews were pushed out of the economy. With these gains, these individuals developed an ongoing interest in the persecution. Some landlords and neighbors denounced tenants or others for private behavior they observed. This included the crime of racial defilement, sexual relations between Jews and people of German or related blood, or violations of paragraph 175 of the German Penal Code, which prohibited homosexuality. Germans who did not play an active role responded to the persecution of Jews in various ways. A large number passively accepted the exclusion of Jews from their workplaces and their isolation in schools and communities. Others applauded as spectators at public parades meant to shame those accused of racial defilement. Nazi policies and actions, combined with the responses of elites and ordinary Germans, culminated in the near-total isolation of Jews from German society by the end of 1938. Although many Germans approved of the marginalization of Jews, they disapproved of the violence and property destruction that occurred during the Nazi-led pogroms of November 9th to 10th, 1938. Nevertheless, few spoke out. The same happened during the deportations of Jews from Germany after the start of World War II. In areas where the deportations caused some discontent, Nazi propagandists simply intensified their efforts to promote acceptance of the removal of the internal enemy. Various motivations influenced the responses to the persecution of Jews and created a climate of passivity or apathy. Motives ranged from belief in Nazi ideology to fear and self-interest. For example, Nazi propaganda efforts amplified long-standing anti-Semitic prejudices and led many people to view Jews as outsiders. The Nazis also maintained near-total control over public space. Government censorship prevented dissenting voices from being heard, and few Germans had the courage to speak publicly against the persecution of Jews. They were aware of the risks faced by dissenters in a police state where opponents of the regime could be arbitrarily arrested and imprisoned in concentration camps without trial. Pressures to submit to authority and obey laws and decrees existed even without the additional intimidation of Nazi activists. Many people wanted to protect their jobs or advance their careers. Others did not want to go against the current by refusing to conform to Nazi racist norms. The majority cut ties with their Jewish friends and neighbors. The factor of fear and intimidation should not be overestimated, as it implies that people wanted to help the persecuted. For many Germans, their livelihoods and their families' well-being were simply far greater priorities than a group that represented a small fraction of the population and was constantly demonized as a dangerous threat. As Germany's economy and global position improved during the 1930s, most Germans, including many who had never voted for Hitler and did not identify as Nazis, supported the positive changes and ignored the threats to Jews and other Nazi targets. Far more people came under direct Nazi rule once the war began. How ordinary people in these areas responded to the persecution of Jews varied depending on factors such as country, region, degree of Nazi control, existing hostility toward Jews, and perceptions of whether Germany would win the war and remain the master of Europe. After the invasions of Poland in 1939, Western and Southern Europe in 1940, and the Soviet Union in 1941, German forces spread across vast occupied territories. They needed tens of thousands of non-Germans, from local officials and police to ordinary citizens, to help implement occupation policies, including measures targeting Jews and other victims of Nazism. In regions of Eastern Europe under direct Nazi rule, non-Germans helped carry out Nazi policies, including the ghettoization and forced labor of Jews, the seizure or transfer of Jewish property, and the capture and transport of Jews to extermination sites during the mass shootings organized by the Nazis of Jews, communists, Roma, and psychiatric patients in Soviet territories. Tens of thousands of non-German auxiliary police served as guards and killers. Local government officials recruited others to work as clerks, gravediggers, cart drivers, and cooks. Some locals, sometimes on their own initiative, violently attacked Jews, robbing and murdering them. The motives of non-Germans who participated in the persecution and murder of Jews in Eastern Europe under Nazi rule varied. Nazi propaganda reinforced long-standing local anti-Semitic prejudices. Individuals driven by ideology were free to act within the climate of permitted violence against Jews in places occupied by the Soviets between 1939 and 1941. Local populations often blamed Jews as a group for Soviet oppressive policies. German propagandists aimed to deepen such animosity, constantly linking Jews and communists to the mythical Judeo-Bolshevik threat. Tens of thousands of men joined auxiliary police forces or militias. Among their motivations were the need for employment, income, and food, or the opportunity for personal gain, including enrichment from looted property. Some men sought to prove loyalty to their new German masters. Others sought the opportunity to avenge the suffering of their families under Soviet rule, or to settle other scores. Radical nationalists in Ukraine and the Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, cooperated with the Germans because they hoped the Germans would reward them by allowing them to establish independent and ethnically homogeneous states. Hopes that were never realized. Local police officers were called upon to help guard ghettos, isolated areas of cities where Jews were forced to live under deplorable conditions. During the liquidation of ghettos, these forces assisted the SS and other German police in capturing and gathering Jews for deportation and death in Nazi extermination centers. Not all regular police officers were enthusiastic collaborators, but they feared the consequences of disobeying German orders. In the countryside, some local police, along with volunteer firefighters, participated in Jew hunts. Other locals denounced hidden Jews. The opportunity for profit, whether through payment by the Germans or by taking Jewish belongings, tempted Jew hunters in the countryside and in cities. Blackmailers threatened to denounce hidden Jews in order to extort money and possessions from them. Some locals initially hid Jews, but later betrayed them out of fear that they and their families would be shot if the Jews were discovered. In other parts of Europe that were allied with or occupied by Nazi Germany, some leaders and public officials helped, with more or less zeal, to implement anti-Jewish policies. The measures included enacting discriminatory laws and decrees on citizenship, employment, and business ownership, as well as confiscating Jewish property. In some cases, such as in Romania, Hungary, Italy, Bulgaria, and France, non-German leaders, motivated by anti-Semitism, racism, and local nationalism, acted on their own initiative. In every country within the German sphere of domination, they helped identify, register, and mark Jews. Members of regular police forces and militarized gendarmeries captured Jews and gathered them for transport to the east. The Nazis disguised these deportations as resettlement for labor. Non-German railway workers transported the deportees to the borders. The presence of Jew hunters, some of them ideologically aligned with the Nazis and many tempted by the promise of monetary rewards, reduced the chances of survival for hidden Jews. This occurred even in countries such as the Netherlands, where local hostility toward Jews was not so prevalent before the war. In general, the Germans' ability to leverage their power to gain the cooperation of non-Germans was much greater before their defeat at Stalingrad, winter of 1942 to 1943. Many Europeans who believed that Germany would remain the master of Europe in the near future began to envision the possibility of German defeat. They became less willing to participate in actions for which they might later be held accountable after the war. Shifts in perceptions about the outcome of the war also encouraged efforts toward organized resistance. By the autumn of 1943, the likelihood of German defeat was high. However, by that time, it was too late for most European Jews. 5 million were already dead. A small minority of individuals, acting alone or within organized networks, took risks to help Jews. Assistance came in various forms. Some offered gestures of solidarity. In Paris, for example, some non-Jews wore Stars of David in protest. In some German cities, non-Jews sometimes greeted Jews wearing the star. Other individuals risked punishment and death trying to save Jews. They hid Jews during roundups, provided them with food, warned them of danger, and protected their belongings. If one looks more closely at the German perpetrators, it becomes apparent that indeed, a disturbing number of them could be classified as sadistic or mentally ill, but the majority were quite sane. Another theory that has been disproven is the assumption that the cruelties experienced during World War I could explain the insane killings during World War II. Individual motivations, such as greed, jealousy, sexual drives, and other typical triggers, the kind criminologists instinctively look for first, were not found in most of the perpetrators. Something that has been clearly refuted is the common claim that Nazi perpetrators acted under superior orders, fearing for their own lives if they disobeyed. In fact, the opposite is true. It was often a free choice to volunteer to participate in mass killings. The killing factories of Auschwitz-Birkenau, Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka, where some offenders murdered enormous numbers of people with the help of technical support, were responsible for half of the 6 million Holocaust victims. The rest were hunted down, shot, or starved to death before the eyes of many. What explains the ease of this immense outbreak of violence? Comradeship undoubtedly plays an important role. Frank Bajor describes it with the help of a 1933 quote from publicist Sebastian Haffner, referring to a training camp for future lawyers. Comradeship completely eliminates the feeling of individual responsibility. One simply behaves like everyone else, does what everyone does. That is how many, though not all, of the crimes of the Holocaust can be explained. With its open policy of anti-Semitism, the Nazi regime had outlawed the very existence of Jews. The individual conscience of most people had been switched off. They knew they were part of the machinery of destruction, even those typing letters in the offices of concentration camps. But a perversion of the concept of comradeship made them consider it their duty to continue. Most perpetrators escaped their crimes, more or less. In total, only about 7,000 were convicted in German courts, 172 receiving life sentences. It is a frustrating result, considering the 170,000 accused by the authorities. Around 30,000 to 80,000 of the missing did not live beyond 1945, but most simply disappeared, managing to avoid public prosecution. And so we are left with the lessons of history, which include this saying, "Without the accused, there is no trial." Help us keep this project alive here on YouTube by subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching, God bless you all, and see you soon.